Hello, and welcome to the Ultimate Should You Buy an Arc GPU video. Why is this the Ultimate Should You Buy video? Well, because I'm going to talk to you like a regular person, meaning I'm assuming you don't build gaming PCs for a hobby and don't know what ReBar or CSM mean. But if you're looking to buy the A750 or A770 or heck, even the A380, you're going to want to know what ReBar and CSM mean. But before I do that, because part of this video is going to sound like I'm trying to steer you away from the card, and I'm not. I'm just trying to bring awareness to you before you spend your money. But first, let me go over really quickly why you should buy one of these cards. Now, for $250, $350, whether you're buying the A750 or A770, these cards kick butt. I have the A770 16 gigabyte LE version, and I can play all sorts of resolutions, even on high settings. Here's some footage of me playing on my ultra wide. The game you're seeing is Atomic Heart. It's on high settings, and I'm getting well over 100 FPS at 5120 by 1440, which is a 32 by 9 ultra wide aspect ratio. I mean, that's just insane. For 350 bucks, are you kidding me? Yeah, you probably can't do that in every game. But in really well optimized games like this, you just can't beat these cards for the price. I mean, that is crazy performance for that price point. Now, here's the same game settings at a more normal 2560 by 1440, and I'm getting 144 frames, even while capturing an OBS. I didn't see an FPS dip. Normally, I get about minus 10 FPS while capturing. I stopped OBS a few times while recording this video to check to make sure that I was seeing what I was seeing, and whether I was capturing or not, there was no discernible hit in FPS performance. Again, that's nuts, because if you look at my Cyberpunk video where I did a benchmark there, it was clear the performance dip that I got when I was capturing an OBS, and I went over that in the video. So that's something you're curious about checking out. If you want to use the AV1 capture on this card to capture while you're playing games, make sure you check that out so you can get an idea of that. So before we get into that, you may be asking yourself, why should I care what this guy has to say? Thank you for asking that, random internet person. Number one, I own the A770. I mean, just look at how awesome this box is, okay? I've owned this card since the end of February. I'm very familiar with the performance, the quirks, the pros and cons. It's in my main gaming PC, which I use when I get off work to unwind. I use it mainly for content consumption, gaming, and some content creation, like this video. Number two, I work with computers for a living. I fix computers every day, software, hardware issues, so I'm more advanced than your typical gamer. But we don't really care about any of that because, again, I'm not going to talk to you from a PC tech point of view. I'm going to talk to you as like a buddy who's going to help explain things in the layman, so ultimately you can decide whether or not the Alchemist line of GPUs are for you. Number three, I've purchased and owned many different GPUs for over 20 years. So this white that you see in my beard isn't just for show. I'm an old man. My first GPU was a GeForce 4. 2002. What? So I've been on Team Green. I've been on Team Red, but I'm going to keep it real. I do think that this card is a great value. I personally love it. However, this card is not going to be for everybody. For some of you on older systems, this is probably not going to be the card for you. For the rest of you on newer systems, it probably will be. Just set your BIOS settings and you can use it straight away. However, even if you are able to do that, depending on how fancy you're going to get with your monitors, maybe multiple monitors, you're throwing in some high refresh rate ones, you're going to want to stick around to the end, towards the end of this video when I get into the cons section, because depending on your personal case, you may want to skip this card and get something else. Confused? Great. That's why I'm here. So let's get into it, starting with ReBar and CSM. Now, what is ReBar or resizable bar, and why is that important to know before buying an Arc GPU? Without this setting enabled, you will get a decrease of anywhere from 5 to 20% less FPS than you normally would be getting if you just had this enabled. And you may be saying to yourself, well, that's not that big of a deal. I don't mind taking a little bit of an FPS hit. Well, it's not just that. You could be inviting numerous stutters. Again, depends on game. Maybe you find the one game where if you just have rebar disabled, maybe it's not that big of a deal. In most other games though, you really will be inviting a lot more stutters. Now, if you're not familiar with what a stutter is, let's say that you're playing and then you move the camera a little bit and then it seems like the game's frozen for like a second, maybe sometimes even 2 seconds, or more. And then all of a sudden it seems like the frames come back and you can move, like it seems like it's unfrozen. If that happens anytime you turn your character around or you move your character or you're walking down the hallway or whatever the case may be, that's just going to be unplayable. So if you're just going to be watching YouTube videos, probably not a big deal to not have rebar. But if you're planning on playing multiple games, you really need to have this enabled. How can we figure out if your system supports rebar? Most Intel 10th generation chips or newer, as well as most Ryzen 3000 CPUs and newer will support rebar. So if you just generally take that information, you can probably figure out whether or not your system supports rebar. You can also look in the manual that that came with your motherboard. It should have been in the paperwork out of the box that your motherboard came out of. You can also just Google the particular model of your motherboard. You could just say, does MSI blah 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 support rebar, or does this Gigabyte blah 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 support rebar? You can do it that way. But another way is you can just go into your BIOS and check, which is what we're about to do now. All right, so now we're going to go in the BIOS here, and how you get to the BIOS is going to be different depending on what kind of motherboard you have, but I'm just going to go in this way. All right, so sorry, I have a ultra wide here on the bottom, and this is where it popped up, so this is where it is. I'll have to do my best to zoom it in, but right now we're going to look for the rebar setting. Here we go. So I'm using a Gigabyte B550 motherboard. Now my rebar setting is under settings and then IO support, and your motherboard might call it above 4G decoding. You might need to enable this first in order for this rebar menu to pop up. I know you can't see that well when the little highlight thing is over it, but like I said, depending on your motherboard manufacturer, it might just be laid out like this, where you see 4G decoding and rebar support. But I've seen some people with different motherboards, they have to go to above 4G decoding, set that to enabled before rebar pops up. So just keep that in mind. If you don't see rebar, just make sure you look for this also in order to try and get that to pop up. Now, rebar support should either be set to enabled or auto. On my motherboard, it just calls it auto. So now we have rebar enabled. All right, the next thing we need to do is we need to disable CSM. Now for me, on my motherboard, I would go to boot, okay, because it's a boot function, okay, and we're going to go down to CSM, and this must be disabled. Now you might be wondering, what the heck is CSM? Let me put it to you this way: you have either installed Windows with CSM either disabled or enabled, which means your system will only boot properly the way that you have it right now, depending on what this is set as. In order for rebar to function, CSM support must be disabled. If we were to try to disable it and then boot up on a system like that, we would exit the BIOS, it would try to boot, it'd probably spin a little bit longer than you used to, and it would restart. And then it would try to boot up again. You would see the BIOS spin a little bit longer than you used to, and then it would probably restart. Okay? And the reason for that is we installed Windows with CSM support enabled, meaning your boot partition is MBR. That means that you will have to remedy this first before you're able to use rebar. How would you fix that? What you would need to either do is convert MBR to GPT. You can Google how to do that. Honestly, when I look at that, it looks like a wall of text. And I personally, even though I am very tech savvy, going through those steps to convert MBR to GPT, I personally think it's a hassle. So how would I get around that? Again, I'm speaking to you as my buddy that's not tech savvy. How would I get around that? What I would do is I would have this CSM set to disabled, and then I would just reinstall Windows. Some of you are probably dreading that prospect because maybe you've had that hard drive for a while. It's loaded with a whole bunch of stuff. Maybe you got a bunch of Skyrim mods or Fallout mods or whatever mods that you don't want to lose, or pictures or whatever, and that's just too much of a hassle. But for me, what I actually ended up doing was I just slotted in another hard drive I had lying around. I set this to disabled, and I just reinstalled Windows because I previously was using CSM support, which is a legacy boot method. Okay, again, to reiterate, ReBar must be enabled. CSM must be disabled. And then when you get to Windows, ReBar will work. Now that you know about the settings you must have, let me also go into the cons. I promise I'm not trying to scare you away, but I'm telling you all the stuff that you should be aware of first. If we look at our power draw, yeah, I am capturing an OBS, but right now the power draw is about 50 watts. When I'm not capturing an OBS, I'm still around 50 watts. Now, out of the box, as soon as you slot this in, you know, you set your settings in the BIOS like we talked about, and you know, you got a pretty cool system that can support this GPU, and you got it in there, and then you notice that your power draw is around 30 to 40 watts just at idle. You're not even doing anything, it's just 30 to 40 watts at idle. Intel does have a workaround or a fix that you can enable for a more reasonable power draw. And I will say off the bat, it does work generally as long as you can meet a certain condition. If you're using office monitors that only go to 60 hertz, great. Yeah, that fix will work for you. The fix will work for you, okay? If you have anything fancier than that, and you got a high refresh rate monitor, you know, or you got some fancy multiple screen displays, you know, so maybe one is on 70 hertz and then another one's like on 80 hertz and another one's like a 144. Really, anything over 70, you're not going to be getting that 5 to 20 watt power draw. You're going to be getting around 50. Yeah. I think when I was using, what is that wallpaper engine, that really cool wallpaper engine that's available on Steam, where like you can have animated wallpapers and things like that and screensavers. Using that in conjunction with my fancy displays, I idle at like 60 watts. Yeah, just something to be aware of. Now, I will show you the fix that I'm talking about so you can see what I mean. And I'll tell you my general experience of what I was doing when this fix worked, because obviously something changed, right? That's why I'm currently idling at 50 watts. So the first setting that you would need to change according to Intel's workaround or fix here is that you would need to go into your power options, okay? And depending on whatever plan you're using, you need to go into the advanced settings, because specifically we need to go to where it says PCI Express Link State Management. Now, right now I have it set to off because there's no point. This fix doesn't work for me because of some reasons I'll get to explaining. You need to set this to maximum power savings. All right. And then we need to go into the BIOS, like I'll show you now, and set one more setting. Okay, so back to the BIOS. So regarding the setting we need to tweak in order to take advantage of the power saving setting so that we can idle at normal wattage. On my motherboard, you'll have to find where this is on yours. All motherboard UIs are going to be different. I need to go to miscellaneous, and what we need to do is go to PCI ASPM mode. And what we need to do is enable that, and we actually get some options here. Okay, when I go to enable that, these are the options I get. You can read up what these are. If you want, you can just Google them. Depending on your motherboard, you may have one option in here, or you may be like me, where you have 3 options to choose from. I went with L1 entry. If you want to go with that, just to make things simple, go ahead and go with that. You can Google what each of these are and just see what it suggests. I think the Intel guide that I'll link in the description suggests which profile this should be set to, but I went with L1 entry. So if you're going to go with that, just hit enter. We are going to save and exit. I'm going to hit exit without saving because I'm not changing that, because you know it's not going to work for me. That's what you would do, just save and exit, and then with that you should be idling at a respectable wattage. Now that both those settings have been enabled, pulling up Arc control, you may not immediately see it take effect, but once it does, maybe you might have to give it about 5 minutes or maybe do a reboot, but generally it will take effect, provided that you're at a lower refresh rate monitor. And then you should see this idling anywhere from 5, even 3 watts to about 20 watts or so, give or take a little bit. Why is that a thing? I don't know. This card's pretty quirky. It's the first line of Arc GPUs, and that's just a thing on the A770. I believe that is a thing on the A750. I don't know if it's a thing on the A380, but I wouldn't be surprised. I think it's just the way that the hardware is actually architected, and there's no way getting around that. So if you're using monitors at a higher refresh rate than 60, you're just going to have a higher power draw. Will it be as high as mine at 50 watts? Maybe not. I don't know. There was a point in time where I had this GPU I just upgraded from the GTX 970, and I was using the monitors that I had been using for a few years on the GTX 970, which was basically just a standard 24-inch next to another 24-inch setup, and they were office monitors, although IPS panels, but they were both at 60 hertz, and this fix worked, no problem. I then added an ultra-wide monitor, which I'll show you here on the screen. This is my current setup. Now, I actually ended up getting rid of the 2 24-inch office monitors, and I went to this ultra-wide one that you'll see here on the bottom. Now, initially, I was just running the one on the bottom, and when I was running that, I had it set to 70 hertz, which is the max. So even though this is an ultra-wide, it's not a gaming ultra-wide, it's an office ultra-wide. And I was running it at 70 hertz. I was idling around 15 to 20-ish watts. All right, it went up a little bit, and I figured it would. I then wanted to upgrade my display game a little bit. So I went with a stacked monitor setup, and I ended up getting a 144 hertz monitor on top. Which I love. However, once I introduced this high refresh rate monitor, it just completely went past the limits here, over 9,000 Dragon Ball reference. And now I am idling at 50 watts. And again, when I have Wallpaper Engine up, it's like 60, and it just kind of fluctuates around 60, which is a little nutty. So why am I telling you all this? Well, you should be aware that on the Alchemist line, that's just a thing. It's not even a question of whether or not this card can play games, because it definitely can. And the Arc GPUs do a great job of doing that. It's all the other stuff that you're not going to get from watching the benchmark videos that I just want you to be aware of. This is the end user kind of stuff I want you to know so you can make the best decision. I don't want you to spend $250 on an A750 and regret it. I don't want you to spend $350 on an A770 and regret it. So since we are in the con section, There is something else I wanted to go over. Black screens. Now, what do I mean by black screens? If you frequent the Intel Arc subreddit, you will see at least 2 to 3 posts a day of people slotting this GPU in, excited to use it, only to have to then immediately have to troubleshoot the thing. Generally, what I see is some people, they're just using the machine and then it goes to a black screen, like the video signal got lost, but you know, everything is still on. There's no reboots or anything like that. So there's a whole range of things that could be happening here, and not all black screens are created equal. I could probably make a 2-hour video based on this subject alone. So what I have pulled up on the screen here are just a couple of issues that you'll generally see here. For some, just swapping out the HDMI cable to a DP cable works. And that's really more of a workaround, right? Some people might be dependent on using HDMI. Maybe their display or monitor only accepts HDMI. Maybe the monitor that they're using to get the refresh rate that they want requires HDMI. Otherwise, maybe they're locked to a lower refresh rate, right? If I paid money for a monitor that is, you know, supports a higher refresh rate, but I have to use HDMI to use it, certainly that would be a deal breaker for me. For some, swapping that HDMI cable out for a newer, you know, like a higher version of HDMI cable, that seems to work for those people. So that is something, you know, that you'll have to be aware of. With that said, I'm sure there are plenty of ARC users out there that use the HDMI and have never had any issues. But for as many of those people that exist, there are just as many that have a bunch of issues with HDMI. Okay. The black screen issue doesn't end there. Let me point you to this other thread. This one is ridiculously long, but I picked this out because it's a great example. It's very well written, and you can see that there was probably a lot of frustration for this individual trying to figure this out. Now, what will happen to him, a screen will just blank out on him. All right. And it seems to be for him always after waking from sleep. Okay. And sometimes it even reboots the machine trying to wake up. Yeah, there are a lot of people out there that probably don't have any of these issues. And for this particular user, I did see that one of the outliers for him was he is on Linux. So he's using the Intel Arc Linux drivers. Now, while those drivers are improving all the time, they still have room for improvement, as there are many gripes from different Linux users. I don't personally use Linux myself, so I can't comment too much about that, but I see their posts and I do see what they're going through and their frustration. So I would invite you to come over to the Reddit subreddit in Intel Arc and look at the different issues and get familiar with that. With that said, keep in mind that these are mainly going to be issue posts. It's a lot easier to make a post when you're frustrated than when you're having a good time with the card. So just something to keep in mind. Don't think that everybody that has one of these cards is having these issues. I'm just bringing awareness to this so that you can see for yourself and make the best decision for yourself. Now, let me explain my black screen issue. All right. Let me just open up my Xbox thingy. Thingy being a technical term in IT. As a PC tech, I use thingy a lot to describe things. Okay. Now, you probably can't see this on my end, but there was an update that just happened, and I haven't opened my Xbox app up in a long time, and my screen literally just did what I'm about to tell you right now. So you can't physically see this, but hold on a second. Let me get my phone camera, and I'm going to film what's going on. Now that right there is what happens to me personally when I open something I haven't opened in a long time or ever. If I install a game in, like let's just say a Steam, or in this example, Xbox Game Pass, okay? One that I never played before. As soon as the game launches, and it's supposed to appear on the screen here, the screen goes black. And then it may come on for a second, and then it goes black again. And it is open. I can see on the taskbar that it'll be open. And it's not one of those things where like it's open on a display you don't actually have, and if you hold the Windows key and move the arrows over, you can bring that application back on the screen. No, it's displayed, but the screen goes black. If I just installed a game and it does that to me, my fix is click the monitor off, click it back on, just that quick. The screen comes back on, I see the game right where it should have been the whole time, and then that never happens again for that game. It only happens when I install something I've never played before. Now, it just happened to me in Xbox Game Pass because I had to update it, and then I just closed it. I never reopened it again. So it's kind of like I'm opening it for the first time since the update, right? And it just did it for me there. And my fix is, like I said, click monitor off, click it back on, boom, no big deal. I really don't have to do that very frequently. There are weeks where that just doesn't happen because, again, it's just when I install something I've never really played before, maybe something I've never used, and that may happen. And that usually does happen, actually. Now, this was never an issue when I had monitors at 60 hertz. Both these monitors are connected via DP, so I'm not even using HDMI. The only main difference is I've introduced a monitor at 144 hertz. What I think is happening, I think the way that this card deals with power saving settings has some really wacky behavior on displays or monitors. In the extreme, the video signal just cuts out and doesn't come back until some people reboot or get rid of the HDMI altogether and go to DP. For whatever reason, the way this card is architected, if you have a higher refresh rate monitor, I don't know if the card, it just doesn't happen to work very well on a higher refresh rate monitor, and what ends up happening is that the monitor and the GPU aren't agreeing on what the heck is supposed to be happening, and the signal just gets cut. My personal hardware, my personal system, the personal monitors that I have set up right here, my fix is simple. Monitor on and off, the one that's affected. It just depends on whether or not something like that is a deal breaker for you. That in particular isn't a deal breaker for me. What would be a deal breaker for me is this poor guy's experience. Okay, that would certainly be a deal breaker for me. I would probably get something else in that case if I was having to troubleshoot that much. Swapping from HDMI to DP, that's a workaround for me. I don't really care about that. So we've talked about power draw being a con, and now this black screen thing being a con. And again, I'm not trying to scare you away from this card. We've looked at different black screen issues. There are many ARC users out there that have never had these issues. I'm sure there's somebody out there that uses multiple high refresh rate monitors and they've never had a black screen issue. I'm sure that's possible. Okay. Generally, when you are in the Intel Arc subreddit, you're just going to see people posting problems. So don't let that taint your thoughts on the card, but just be aware that mainly people are posting issues in there to try and get some help. And I pop in there every once in a while to try and give people some help, some advice when I can. And it's just a friendly community to be a part of. So if you are serious about getting this GPU, I invite that you go in there, or if you're just thinking about it, go in there and see some of the issues that you commonly see. Now for this other con, this might not be that big of a deal, but for some people, I see them asking about this all the time. This will greet you each and every time you sign into Windows because it's set to start at startup. This will require you to make a decision, yes or no. Hitting yes will launch the Arc control. A lot of people ask, do I even need it? No. I mean, you should have it installed on your system, but you don't need to have it open all the time, or you don't need to have it running all the time. What does it do? It allows you to go in here and see the performance. It allows you to go in here and look at your gaming profiles if you even have that set up, although that's probably not fully fleshed out yet, so it probably doesn't really function in any useful or meaningful way, so I just ignore this. And it does have the ability to, if you wanted to use this to capture, you could, although I would recommend just going with OBS because it's more robust. I'm sure if this ever gets to the level of NVIDIA Shadow Play, I'm sure it'll be great, but for the time being, I just ignore it. So unless you're trying to do something specific like that in here, this doesn't have to be running. So how do you stop that from popping up at startup? Like this. Right click your taskbar, go to taskbar manager. Let me bring this up here. Whoa. It was on my ultra wide monitor, so it's like super wide. Okay. We're going to go to startup apps. So basically all I did was right click the taskbar. I went to taskbar manager, right? Taskbar manager, that's where I went to. It's opened up. We're going to go to startup apps. And here we can see that we got Arc control. All right. Let's just have it highlighted. And then once it's highlighted, we're just going to click disable. So you'll notice it is still running. That doesn't make the app not run anymore. It doesn't kill the app in any way. It doesn't uninstall it in any way. All it does is it tells Windows not to start this dang thing at startup. So from that moment forward, you can just close that out. From that moment forward, whenever you start up Windows, you won't be greeted with that stupid prompt anymore. And that's generally how you fix it. This is a common enough gripe that I see that I wanted to make sure to put this in the cons because it annoys the living bejesus out of a lot of people. So that's how you fix it. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. Please hit the like button. It greatly helps me out. I just hit 110 subscribers, so hopefully we can get that number up. It's been awesome to see all the interaction I've gotten on these ARC videos because generally I see that people are pretty interested in the cards. So I just hope that with this, I've better equipped you to make an informed decision on whether or not the Alchemist lines of ARC cards, the current lineup of ARC GPUs, is for you or not. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.